I stood in the shadows of the driveway and watched the red ribbon flutter on the hood of a car that cost exactly the same amount as my father's life insurance policy. My name is Cassidy, and I just discovered that the $65,000 meant to keep my family afloat was actually spent on a high-performance engine for my best friend's driveway. My husband didn't just break my heart. He used my father's final gift to buy a front row seat to his affair. Most people believe in the sanctity of marriage, in the for better or worse promise you make under a veil. But standing there, clutching the CCTV footage that proved my husband had been investing my inheritance into another woman's garage, I realized that some vows are just contracts written in disappearing ink. Within 45 seconds of seeing Dominic pull that car into Beatrice's driveway and kiss her like I didn't exist, I had to decide, do I play the grieving daughter, or do I become the woman who takes it all back? The house felt cold, even with the heater humming in the background. It was a shell of a home, filled with furniture we couldn't afford, and secrets I was finally starting to untangle. My father was an amateur astronomer. He used to say that light takes millions of years to reach us, meaning when we look at the stars, we're actually looking at the past. I didn't realize that my own past was about to collide with my present in the most violent way possible. When he passed away, he left me his life insurance, $65,000. It wasn't a fortune, but in our small town, it was enough to pay off the mortgage and give us a fresh start. But Dominic had other plans. For 2 years, he told me the money was locked in a high-yield investment that required a 5-year maturity. Meanwhile, he told me we were drowning in honor debts, loans he'd supposedly taken from his late father to keep his struggling architectural firm alive. Every morning for 700 days, I woke up at 4 a.m. I remember the sound of the alarm clock, a sharp, piercing beep that felt like a needle in my brain. I would look at Dominic, sleeping peacefully in the designer sheets I'd bought him, and I'd feel a sense of pride. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was the silent hero of our story. I worked 60-hour weeks at the local pharmacy. I remember the feeling of the linoleum floors beneath my thinning shoes. By the 10th hour of a shift, my feet would swell so much that the laces felt like they were cutting into my skin. I remember the way my back would ache so intensely I couldn't sleep, and the way the chemical smell of the pills seemed to seep into my skin, into my hair, into my very dreams. I skipped lunches, opting for a single granola bar I'd hide in my pocket, telling Dominic I'd eaten a big meal at work so he wouldn't feel guilty while he ordered takeout. Every Friday, Dominic would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of forged invoices. He'd look so stressed, his brow furrowed, his hands shaking slightly. He'd show me spreadsheets that showed our debt decreasing by mere pennies. "Just a few more double shifts, Cass," he'd say, kissing my knuckles. "We're almost out of the woods. I'm doing this for our future children. I'm doing this for us." I believed him because I had to. If I didn't believe him, then the pain in my back and the exhaustion in my soul were for nothing. I leaned into the lie because the truth was too heavy to carry. One rainy Tuesday, while Dominic was away on a site visit in the city, I went into the attic to find a box of old tax returns. I tripped over a loose floorboard and found a trunk Dominic told me had been lost during our move 3 years ago. It was hidden under a pile of moth-eaten blankets. I opened it, expecting old clothes. Instead, I found a hollowed-out dictionary. Inside that dictionary was the roadmap of my destruction. The siphoning was surgical. He hadn't taken the money all at once. He'd moved it in $5,000 increments over the last year, labeling them as emergency medical expenses for his mother. His mother has been healthy and living in a retirement community in Arizona for 3 years. I checked the dates. June 14th, the day I worked a double shift on my own birthday, He moved $5,000. August 2nd, the day I cried because I couldn't afford to buy a new winter coat, he moved another $4,000. Every cent had actually gone toward the down payment and the monthly insurance for Beatrice's new midnight blue sedan. Beatrice, my best friend, the woman who sat on my couch and watched movies with me while I complained about how tired I was. The woman who held my hand at my father's funeral and told me I was the strongest person she knew. I traced the jagged lines of a forged signature on the final release form. He hadn't even tried to mimic my handwriting perfectly. He just relied on the bank not caring enough to check because he'd presented himself as my representative. He had used my exhaustion as a weapon. He knew I wouldn't check. He knew I was too tired to be suspicious. I remembered the day he brought those papers home. I was coming off a 14-hour shift. My eyes were blurry and my head was pounding with a migraine that made the lights feel like daggers. He'd handed me a stack of papers and said, "Just sign these for the insurance renewal, honey. Don't worry about the details. I've got it. Go to sleep." I signed my life away because I trusted the man who was supposed to be my anchor. I remember the night he cried in my arms, telling me the inheritance was gone because the investment firm had collapsed. I had comforted him. I had told him that money didn't matter as long as we had each other. I felt a cold, sharp blade of reality twist in my gut. While I was offering him my soul, he was calculating how much more he could bleed for my father's memory. I didn't stop at the bank statements. I went to the neighbor's house the next morning, Mr. Henderson, an old veteran who spent his days watching his high-tech security monitors. He looked at me with a look of profound pity. He'd known my father. He'd watched me grow up. "Cassidy," he said, his voice trembling, "I didn't want to say anything, but your husband's truck has been at Beatrice's house every night you're on the graveyard shift. It's been going on for a year." He showed me the footage. It wasn't just the car. It was the way they laughed in the driveway. It was the way Dominic handed her the keys to that midnight blue Mercedes, my father's money in metallic paint, and how she jumped into his arms. The car had a giant red bow on it. A bow paid for my missed lunches and my swollen feet. I sat in Mr. Henderson's darkened living room and watched my life vanish in 1080p resolution. I watched my husband kiss my best friend with a passion he hadn't shown me in years. I watched them toast with champagne I'd never tasted. I didn't scream. I didn't break the windows. I walked back to my empty house and I cleaned. I cleaned every corner of that house until my hands were raw from the breach. I needed the house to be as sterile as my heart had become. I planned a dinner. I called it a legacy dinner. I told Dominic I had received a small, unexpected bonus from the pharmacy for my years of service. I told him I wanted to honor my father's memory by having one last beautiful night before we reevaluated our finances. I told him that Beatrice, as my closest friend and my sister in spirit, needed to be there to help us toast to the future. Dominic was the perfect host. He was so excited at the prospect of more money. He spent the afternoon cleaning the house, the first time he'd touched a vacuum in months. He bought expensive steaks and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He was whistling. He was happy. He thought he'd won. Beatrice arrived wearing a designer coat that I knew, based on the ledger, I had indirectly paid for. She looked radiant, her eyes sparkling with the kind of confidence you only get when you think you've successfully stolen someone's life. She hugged me. She smelled like expensive lilies. "Cassidy, this is such a lovely idea," Beatrice said, her voice smooth and fake. She adjusted her napkin, her diamond ring catching the light. I recognized that ring. It was the one Dominic told me he'd sold to pay for my father's headstone. I'd spent 6 months saving up to buy a cheap granite slab because he told me the real money was gone. "Your father would be so proud of how you've handled everything. You're so strong. You're an inspiration to us all." I looked at her. Then at Dominic, I felt the heat rising in my chest, a slow, burning fire that was finally reaching the surface. I'm glad you think so, Beatrice, because strength is exactly what it takes to work 16-hour shifts in a pharmacy so your husband can afford the insurance on your midnight blue Mercedes. It takes a lot of strength to be the fool while everyone else is laughing. The silence that followed was so thick I could almost taste it. Dominic's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Beatrice's smile didn't fade. It froze, like a mask that had been glued to her face. Cassidy, honey, what are you talking about? You're clearly exhausted. You're talking nonsense. Maybe you should go lie down, Dominic said, his voice dripping with that patronizing concern he'd used for years to gaslight me. I'm not exhausted, Dominic. I'm awake. For the first time in 3 years, I'm wide awake. I pulled out my phone. I didn't show them photos. I showed them the live GPS tracker I'd tucked into the wheel well of that car 3 hours ago while Beatrice was at the salon. Because the tracker says that car, the one bought with my father's insurance money, is currently parked in our driveway. And the bank says the signatures on the wire transfers are forgeries. I spoke to the manager this morning. He was very helpful once I mentioned the word fraud. I turned to Beatrice. I gripped the table. And the neighbor's CCTV shows that you've been supporting my husband in ways that friends usually don't. Tell me, Beatrice, does the leather interior feel better knowing it's upholstered with my father's life? Does the engine sound smoother knowing I paid for it with my health? I looked at them and wondered, am I a monster for wanting to see them lose everything? Is it more moral to just walk away and be at peace? Or is true peace only found when justice is served, even if it leaves everyone in the dirt? If I don't punish them, am I just teaching them that they can do this to the next woman? Dominic stood up, his chair screeching against the hardwood like a dying animal. You don't understand, Cass. It was an investment. I was going to pay it back. I was going to flip that car and put the money back in the account before you ever noticed. I did it for us. I wanted us to have more. You wanted her to have more, I said, standing up to face him. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt like a giant. You love my inheritance. You love the way I worked myself to the bone so you could play house with her. You love the silence I gave you while you robbed me blind. But the silence is over. The resolution didn't involve a shouting match. It didn't involve me throwing wine in her face, though God knows I wanted to. It involved the repossession agent and the detective I'd called before the first course was even served. As we sat there in the suffocating silence of the dining room, the sound of a heavy diesel engine rumbled in the driveway. The yellow lights of the tow truck flashed against the dining room walls, casting rhythmic, haunting shadows. "That's your car, Beatrice," I said quietly. "Or rather, it's the evidence of a felony. Since the signatures were forged, the contract is void. The dealership is taking it back, and the police have the file on the $65,000 you helped him launder into your name. And Dominic, the house is in my name. My father made sure of that. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag before the locks are changed." Dominic tried to reach for my hand, his eyes filling with fake tears. He realized then that the woman who worked double shifts to support his lies was gone. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time, I saw them truly see each other. Not as lovers, but as two rats trapped in a cage of their own making. Beatrice was looking at him with disgust. He was looking at her with blame. Their love was built on my money, and without it, there was nothing left but resentment. "Cassidy, please, I'll give it back. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll do whatever it takes," Dominic pleaded. "You can't give back 2 years of my life," I whispered. "You can't give back the health I lost or the grief you exploited. You can't give back the respect I had for the man I thought you were." I walked to the front door and held it open. The night air was sharp and clean, finally washing away the smell of Beatrice's expensive lilies and Dominic's expensive lies. There's nothing left to say. You wanted my life? You can have the wreckage of it. I'm moving on with what's left of my father's dignity. I watched them walk out into the cold. They didn't even hold hands. Beatrice was walking several feet ahead of him, her head down, her designer coat looking ridiculous in the mud of the driveway. Without the luxury car and the stolen money, they looked like strangers. They stood on the sidewalk, arguing in hushed, angry tones as the tow truck drove away with the midnight rose. I went back inside and sat at the table. The house was finally quiet. The ticking of the clock no longer sounded like a countdown to poverty. It sounded like the heartbeat of a new life. I picked up my father's old watch, which Dominic had tried to pawn months ago, the one thing I'd managed to track down and buy back this morning. I realized then that the honor debt was never mine to pay. It was theirs, and today the bill finally came due. I didn't need $65,000 to be happy. I just needed the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe.